A man walks into a hospital in France. He's 44 years old. He's not in pain. He's not scared. He just noticed his left leg felt a little weak lately. His wife told him to get it checked. So he did. The doctor orders a routine brain scan, the kind that takes 12 minutes and tells you nothing is wrong. But when the image loads on the screen, the radiologist stops typing. He leans forward. He looks at the scan, then at the patient sitting in the waiting room, reading a magazine, then back at the scan, because what he is looking at is medically impossible, not rare, not unusual, not a condition he hadn't seen before. Impossible, where a human brain should be. 1,400 grams of dense, intricate, electrically firing tissue. There is almost nothing. Just a thin shell of cells pressed flat against the inside of the skull, and beneath that, filling the entire cavity where a mind should live, water. Darkness, a void. This man has roughly 10% of a normal human brain. He has had a wife for over a decade. He has raised 2 children. He has held a government job for years, processing paperwork, attending meetings, making decisions. And he has absolutely no idea that his skull is essentially empty. Now here's the part that should unsettle you most, more than the missing brain, more than the water, more than any of what I'm about to tell you. His doctors ran the cognitive tests anyway, expecting nothing, expecting a man who had somehow fooled the world while functioning on autopilot. His IQ came back at 75. Not a genius, but not a ghost. A functioning, feeling, fully present human being, living inside a skull with almost no brain to speak of. And the question that broke open neuroscience that year, the question that still doesn't have a clean answer, if the brain is where you live, where exactly has this man been living for 44 years? Let's go back to the beginning. Not 2007, much further. This man was born in the early 1960s in France. And like thousands of babies every year, he was born with a condition called hydrocephalus, water on the brain. In plain terms, the fluid that normally flows gently around your brain and spine, cerebrospinal fluid, was building up, accumulating, pressing inward with nowhere to go. In a newborn skull, that pressure is catastrophic. It crushes developing brain tissue. So the doctors intervened. They inserted a shunt, a small drainage tube to relieve the pressure. It worked. The boy recovered. His head circumference normalized. And then, as far as anyone was concerned, the problem was solved. He grew up. He went to school. He was slow, not dramatically, just a bit slower than average. The kind of kid who struggles a little but gets by. Work in the civil service. He got married. He had 2 children. His IQ, when eventually tested, came in at 75, technically on the boundary of intellectual disability. But he was functioning, holding a government job, paying taxes, raising a family. By every social measure, this was a man who had figured out life. What nobody knew, what he himself had absolutely no idea about, was that somewhere along the way, over decades, quietly and without a single dramatic symptom, his brain had been disappearing. The shunt had failed, not suddenly, not catastrophically, just slowly, gradually. The fluid had begun to accumulate again, year after year, millimeter by millimeter, pressing inward from all sides. And his brain, rather than dying the way a brain should when it's compressed, had simply retreated. By the time he walked into that clinic in 2007, what remained of his brain tissue was a thin shell, a rim, pressed flat against the inside of his skull like a coat of paint on a wall. The center of his skull, pure fluid, a black silent lake where a brain should have been. And he had lived there, inside that void, for 30 years, without knowing, without pain, without crisis. Which raises the question that the doctors in Marseille couldn't stop asking each other. If the brain is where consciousness lives, where had this man been living all along? To understand what happened inside this man's skull, you need to understand something about the brain that most people never learn in school. Your brain does not like sudden change. It is catastrophically bad at it. destroy 10% of someone's brain in a car accident, and you get a stroke, you get paralysis, you get personality collapse. But the brain has a secret mode, one that it almost never needs to use. Slow it down. Apply pressure not in seconds, but in years, in decades. Give the brain time to sense the encroachment, to adapt, to quietly reassign its functions, to compress and reorganize, without ever triggering a crisis alarm. Do that, and something almost miraculous begins to happen. This is what the fluid did to this man's brain. It didn't attack. It didn't strike. It crept, like water finding its way under a door, imperceptible in any single moment, but relentless across years. Every month, a fraction more pressure. Every year, a little more tissue displaced. The brain, sensing the change, did what no engineer has ever been able to replicate in any machine ever built. It adapted. Function by function, region by region. Think of it like a city that's slowly losing its buildings to a rising flood. A city that, rather than drowning, picks up its most essential operations, its power grids, its communication lines, and moves them to higher ground, to whatever space remains. The tissue that remained, that thin, flattened rim pressed against the skull, somehow maintained the functions of an entire organ. Vision, language, motor control, emotional regulation, memory, squashed into a shell less than a centimeter thick. And the medical world, when it learned of this case, had only one word for what had happened: impossible. But here's what makes this story even more disturbing, because researchers found that this man was not entirely alone. Who else is out there? And what does that mean for everything we think we know about the mind? The scientific term is neuroplasticity. But what happened in this man's skull was neuroplasticity taken to its absolute, logical extreme. When the 2007 paper was published in the Lancet, many neurologists assumed it was a prank. It couldn't be real, because the brain has a map. The frontal lobe handles reasoning. The hippocampus manages memory. The visual cortex processes everything you see. In a normal brain event, damage to any one of these regions produces immediate, devastating loss. This man had all of these regions compressed, flattened, reduced to a fraction of their normal volume, and yet he could see, he could speak, he could remember, he could reason well enough to hold a government job for years, which means the function did not die with the tissue. It moved. Your personality, the specific, irreplaceable texture of who you are, is not stored in any one place. It is not a file on a hard drive. It is more like a song. And a song, if the orchestra is forced to shrink, can still be played differently, imperfectly, but recognizably, by whatever musicians remain. This man's brain had been playing the song of him for 44 years on an orchestra that barely existed. And nobody had heard the wrong notes, not his wife, not his colleagues, not his children. Which brings us to a question that is far more unsettling. If the physical structure of the brain can be almost entirely absent and the person remains, then what exactly is the person? Where does the self live, if not in the brain? Scientists are still arguing about this. And the argument is one of the most important fights in the history of human thought. Let's talk about what this case actually means, practically. The first implication is the one that quietly terrified neurologists. This man had no idea. For 30 years, his brain had been slowly consumed by fluid pressure. He experienced no blackouts, no seizures, no sudden personality changes. He came into a clinic because of mild leg weakness, a symptom so minor that millions of people ignore it every day. How many others are out there right now, their brains slowly retreating behind a wall of fluid, with no warning signs at all? Hydrocephalus affects roughly 1 in every 500 people. Shunts can fail silently, gradually, over years. And if this case proved anything, it's that the brain can compensate so effectively, for so long, that the warning signs become nearly invisible. The second implication hits closer to home. for anyone who has watched a loved one decline with Alzheimer's disease. For decades, we believed that as brain tissue is destroyed, the person disappears with it. But this man's brain challenges that. It suggests that the relationship between physical brain tissue and conscious function is far more flexible than we ever believed. That the brain, given enough time, can maintain a person with a fraction of its normal machinery. It's not a cure, but it's a question that didn't exist before 2007. And the third implication? If this man's personality survived the near-total destruction of his physical brain, what does that tell us about the relationship between matter and mind? Is consciousness something the brain generates, or something the brain receives? Is the self a product of neurons, or something that neurons simply carry? Science doesn't have an answer, and that absence of an answer feels louder than it ever did before. The man from Marseille is still alive. He went home after that 2007 examination, back to his wife, his children, his job, back to the ordinary rhythms of an extraordinary life. He knows, now, that his case sparked debates in universities from Paris to Tokyo to Boston. Whether that knowledge changed anything for him, whether he lies awake some nights thinking about the darkness inside his own skull, we don't know. He has remained private. And perhaps that's right. Perhaps a man who has spent 44 years being unknowingly impossible deserves the right to simply be ordinary. But for the rest of us, the case leaves something behind. A splinter. A question that doesn't go away. We live in an age obsessed with optimization, with filling every moment, improving every function. We are told endlessly that we need more. This man lived with less, almost unimaginably less. And he loved his children, and he went to work, and he was enough. Whatever we are, whatever this spark is that insists on thinking and feeling against every physical odd, it is stranger and stronger and more mysterious than any machine we've ever built to explain it. The brain can disappear. The self remains. We don't know why. We don't know how. And maybe that is the most human thing of all. If you found this story as moving as I did, and if you want to explore more of these incredible mysteries of the human spirit, please consider joining our community by subscribing. It helps us keep telling stories that remind us of how remarkable we truly are. Before you go, I want to leave you with one final thought. If you lost 90% of your brain and could only hold on to one memory, just one, which would it be? Leave it in the comments below. I'll be reading every single one, because those memories, those are the things that truly make us who we are. Thank you for watching.